essentiel. Va-t-on vers un nouveau monde plus féminin? Et Marjorie est là pour nous en parler.
Écoute, c'est une excellente question, notamment parce que moi je suis extrêmement fière du fait que ce panel-là soit constitué de 60% de femmes et de 40% d'hommes. Je pense que la discussion va être absolument passionnante. On a des panélistes, des invités qui viennent du monde entier. Ils sont formateurs d'hommes et de femmes politiques. Ils sont anciens présidents de grandes entreprises et de grandes initiatives pour la diversité en France ou à l'étranger. Ils viennent de Singapour, ils viennent de plein de pays différents. Et on va essayer de comprendre ensemble comment justement on peut réussir à faire de cette question de l'égalité, de la mixité, de la diversité, une question cruciale pour ce nouveau monde. Est-ce que ce sont toujours des questions d'ordre politique, culturel, générationnel, économique? Voilà, on va essayer de parler de
Bientôt
tout
une
ça.
femme présidente aux États-Unis, paraît-il.
Peut-être. Tu as des informations?
Alors, qui sont nos invités? On va les inviter ensemble à venir sur scène. Allons-y.
Alors, d'abord, je vais appeler Selim Jahan, Director of the Human Development Report Office of the UNPD, to join us on stage.
Elle est là?
Il est là. C'est un homme. Mais voilà, en même temps, c'est très bien. Il y a une complète confusion en même temps sur ce plateau. Baroness Denise Kingsmill will also be with us. She's,
Madame la baronne, est-elle là? Elle est là, elle arrive.
Michel Landel, le patron de Sodexo, du groupe Sodexo, est également avec nous.
On le voit, il est là.
Nathalie Loiseau, directrice de l'ENA, deuxième femme à diriger l'ENA.
Bravo.
Avec nous. Elle aura des informations incroyables à nous transmettre dans un instant. Janet Neo, Head of Corporate Sustainability, Asia Pacific for Fuji Xerox. She's coming from Singapore and she's
Welcome.
Gabriela Ramos est déjà avec nous. Gabriela, your OECD Chief of Staff and Sherpa to the G20.
Ça va être en anglais le forum là?
En français et en anglais. Tu sais, nous on fait vraiment de la diversité, un mix absolu, donc entre hommes-femmes et entre français et anglais.
Gabriela parle français.
C'est un leitmotiv sur ce panel.
Et enfin,
last but not least, Louis Schweitzer, évidemment, sera avec nous. Louis, vous êtes président d'honneur de Renault et aussi General Commissioner for Investment.
Eh bien voilà, c'est parti. Bon débat à tous.
Merci infiniment. J'espère que tous les micros sont branchés. Ça devrait être le cas. Ah, on a un générique en plus. C'est incroyable. And welcome to this new panel towards a more feminine new world. That's a crucial question when it comes to this new world we're trying to tackle all along those 2 days. First question, really open to all the panelists on stage. A more feminine new world. What does it actually mean to you? Let's start, for instance, with you, Janet. How would you sum it up?
I would say it's a paradigm shift from the things that we know, the way we know, to our entire new, uncharted way. I want to use a philosophy. I work for a Japanese company, and I hear that a lot. It's a term called Genko Ichi, which means ensuring the unity of deeds and actions. So it's, to me, a more feminine new world. It's about whether we are ready and have that courage and boldness to talk the walk and walk the talk. Yeah, that's it.
Nathalie Loiseau, it is still a question of boldness?
A more feminine new word for me is about encouraging and taking advantage of all forms of talents. I would say my own training is about learning Chinese language and civilization. In China, they say that women are carrying half of the sky, and we cannot go forward without having half of the sky with us.
Baroness Kingsmill, what's your point of view? What's your perspective?
Well, I would actually like to see a more masculinization of the home. I think that would be helpful. I think that would make life much easier for all of us women, that is, if the domestic caring, child rearing, all those unpaid labor that supports our world, if that was shared more equally. My point of view is let's not try and make women fit a mold. Let's try and make men change a little.
So let's ask a man, actually. Michel Landel, what's your perspective?
well, I think it will mean a more balanced world. We live in a very unbalanced world, and we need more balance.
Louis Schweitzer, what about you?
Well, first, it's an issue of fairness. I mean, I have two daughters, And I would not want them to live the life my generation lived. I was advantaged being a man. I do not want my daughters being disadvantaged being women.
Selim, a more feminine new word, what does it mean to you?
Well, let me start by saying that development, if not gendered, is endangered. Therefore, the new feminine world would mean for me actually a new world with gender equality, with equal rights for everybody, equal autonomy, equal opportunities, and so that women do not have to make constrained choices or adaptive choices.
And last but not least, Gabriela Ramos, what's your perspective?
I think that you have said it all. I think it's for the world not to waste their talents. But I would say that it's not about women. It's about the human being, about building an economy and a labor market that is more friendly to the human being. Because I don't think that men are also very happy having to work 25 hours a day and relinquishing their family duties. So I think that it's a family-friendly world for men and for women.
Let's follow up with you, actually, and get a big glance at the big picture and facts and figures. Actually, the OECD launched the gender strategy, was back in 2012, and you also were instrumental in advancing a gender target when it comes to the G20. So could you share with us these achievements and what kind of obstacle do you have to overcome?
Well, I have to say that it's not lack of ideas and lack of evidence that had preventing us from moving. Let me just share with you an anecdote. When we launched the gender strategy in 2011, we were reviewing what do we have at the OECD for gender issues, and I found a fantastic recommendation of 1980, adopted by the Committee of Manpower, by the way, and where we were talking about economic empowerment. And that's our perspective. We're not talking about the more problematic aspects of human rights or legal status. We're just talking about education, employment, and entrepreneurship. And it has been very slow. Education, great progress. Girls are really reaching higher levels of education. And right now at the OECD, they have more chances to have a university degree. But the problems get in education when they need to choose their fields of study, usually avoiding science, technology, and mathematics. And this is very determining for their life afterwards, and where do they go and what do they earn. You get to the labor market, it really gets starting to go down. First, because of labor force participation that is very unequal, and you have gaps in the OECD from 7 to 30, 40%. In the G20, where we adopted the gender target, you have gaps that goes from 7 to 55 in Saudi Arabia, so it's quite a gap. And in entrepreneurship, we don't even have the data to understand why women are less financed or have less access to some of the infrastructure that is necessary for enterprises to succeed. So we took this to and not to talk about wage differential, not to talk about the real possibilities of women to succeed and the glass ceiling, all the things that we know. So we took it to the G20. It was not easy because some of my male Sherpa colleagues were saying, are we really going to ask our leaders to talk about women? I said, well, if you really want to increase the labor force participation by 100 million women in the G20, in a context where growth is low, in a context where there is weak demand, in a context where you have aging. Japan, for example, they don't talk about Abenomics, they talk about womenomics. So the fact is that we put it there with the economic rationale, and I think that's how we achieve this goal to reducing gender gap participation in the labor market by 25% in 2020. It was a great courage by the Australian leadership and Prime Minister Abbott and also his Sherpa, who was a lady. We provided all the evidence and we give a big push in terms to convincing why this was important from the economic sphere. We had the support of President Obama, who was the first to say we are in 2015, now repeated by Prime Minister Trudeau, which we really liked it. But then we asked our Japanese colleague, male Sherpa, to push it, not to make it only a women's talk. It was a real economic rationale to pursue this outcome for the G20, and we're very, very proud that we made it.
Congratulations. But actually, let's turn to the UNPD with you, Selim. What are the main findings, again, and suggestions resulting from the Human Development Reports on the feminization of this brand new world?
This year is the 25th anniversary of the evolution of the human development concept. Next year would be the 25th report of the human development. So if we take the body of work of the Human Development Report over the last quarter of a century, I think 5 points come out very strongly. First, for human development, the issue of gender equality and women's empowerment is a basic and fundamental dimension. It's not an add-on approach. It's not an afterthought. It's not a band-aid approach either. The second point is that we have found that the measurements, indicators, composite indices, they matter because powers are there in terms of numbers. Other measurements and the indicators perfect? No. Are there chances to improve them? Of course, yes. And the issue that we try to highlight there is that let perfection not be the enemy of the good. Let us work with what we have and let us improve on that. And I'm a strong believer that it is better to be vaguely right than to be precisely wrong. The third point that we have been highlighting is that as decisions makers, women are better decision makers in terms of resource allocation, in terms of raising the right priorities, and in terms of bringing a more constructive perspective to the table. And that has been proven in different economies, including conflict, post-conflict, as well as normal economies. Fourth, in terms of policies, we believe that the one single policy which can really make a difference is investing in girls' education. That has multiple as well as multifaceted implications. At the same time, there are certain issues that need to be addressed head-on. The whole question of the women's participation rate in the labor market, their contribution to the economy. If, for example, the unpaid work of Indian women are taken into account, the Indian GDP would go up by 15%. If the Japanese women's labor participation rate, which is now 66%, is then raised to 72%, the Japanese economic growth would be 13% more. So I think that is important. At the same time, there are certain issues that need to be addressed head-on. For example, the whole issue of the domestic violence, the whole issue of the early marriages of girls. These are the things which actually try to shrink women's capabilities. Final point, this is kind of a sales pitch. The 2015 Human Development Report will be launched on 14th of December in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The focus of this particular report is work for human development. And there's a whole chapter and a whole theme on the whole question of gender imbalances and addressing them in paid and unpaid work. When we look at paid and unpaid work, men dominate paid work world and women dominate the world of unpaid work. In the unpaid work, for every 4 hours of unpaid care work, women carry 3 hours of work out of 4 hours. So therefore, there is also a need to recognize the unpaid care work, and there is a need to undertake policies so that the imbalances both in the paid world of work as well as unpaid world of work are addressed.
So actually, let's follow up by tackling to the question of cultural differences. Is getting women into employment feasible in all parts of the world, or women face more complicated challenges in some regions? We will talk in a few seconds with you, Janet, about the Asia-Pacific region and especially Asian society. What is the perspective of the role of women there?
Thank you. I'm delighted to address this question on cultures in Asia-Pacific region. I am based in Singapore, and in my scope of responsibility, I get to work with 14 markets in Asia Pacific, and previously it was 20 markets. So I want to give you an idea about how vast and diverse the region is. So in the north, more of the North Asia, it starts with China, as far as Mongolia, and then coming down to the northeast, which is the Japan and the South Korea economy. And then going down south, then you have the Southeast Asia, the developing countries like Philippines, Thailand, and the Indo-China region, and then Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the South Pacific region, which is Australia, New Zealand. And we go further south in the Pacific Islands, it would be the Solomon Islands, New Caledonia, and the Papua New Guinea. So that's the overview of where Asia Pacific region is, and it's very vast. So to the question of cultural barriers, are women not working or working more because of the cultures in the countries? I want to actually, let's take a look at the labor participation, women's participation in the workforce. I was looking up the World Bank data for 2013. Among the countries in Asia Pacific, do you know which country has the highest percentage of women in the workforce? It's Vietnam, it's at 79%. China is about 71. Japan and South Korea, which is more traditional countries, they are at 48.8%, less than 50%. Singapore is doing about 65. And this statistics that I'm telling you, if we make a comparison to the USA, it's at about 56.3. And in Europe, as a European Union, it's about 58%. Yeah, so actually, if you look at the data, more women are working in the Asia Pacific region. And why are the countries like Vietnam and China have more women in the workforce? I think one of the reasons could be also, if you look at the type of societies they're from, they're socialist country. So there is also a change in the mindset where how the government pushes people, both men and women, to work, and they're equal. So you see these two countries sort of leading in that. Yeah, so I want to tell a story also about 3 generations ago. Singapore is 50 years of independence this year, but we started off as a British colony back in the 1800s, 1900s. So when most of the people that moved to Singapore were 3 generations ago from China, India, Malaysia, or the Straits of Malaysia. My grandparents came from China because of the World War that's happening. So most of the people moved south. Eventually, they end up in Singapore. At a time, in that generation, women, like in the Chinese culture, women are denied from education. Their role is limited within the household, and there's a mentality as well, a mindset that a boy is more favored over a girl. And because of the Chinese culture of carrying on the family name, so if you have a daughter, when she gets married, she has to take the name of her husband, so she cannot carry the family name. And for the Chinese families, it's so important. And you see in that generations, people will have, if they have a baby girl, they want to keep giving birth until they have a son. Yeah, so that was then. And then in Singapore at that time, for my parents' generations, were the females able to go to school and have education? I think the thinking of my grandparents' generation is that they still favored the boys. So when my grandparents had money, they had 11 children. So when they had money, they would send the boys to school first. So all my aunties, they don't go to school because my grandparents don't believe in that. But they will help their relatives' sons to go to school. And then comes to my generation, is there even a question about I am being denied to education, to opportunities, or I'm being told that you can only do certain things within the home? No, because I think that the political environment, the support, the social economy has changed in Singapore and give everyone an opportunity based on a merit system. So both that then puts men and women on the same path. And it changed. Today, if you go to Singapore, you see women in business, in politics, maybe in politics, is still quite underrepresented, maybe at about 8%. But there are still women in politics and a lot more women in business. And I was reading a report just came out in 2013 that Singapore is leading in the percentage of women in executive boards. Yeah, so that's a lot of progress, you know, and breaking down cultural barriers with economic growth, with more globalization. When you're open to new world trade, it brings you new ideas. When you're open to technology transfers, yeah, it changes the process and the thinking of a whole generation of people. It might not happen like it didn't happen in my grandparents' time. My parents' time is maybe 50% or more, but my generation is for everyone. Yeah, so that's one example I want to give, but I also want to say that even with economic progress, does cultural barriers still, can we completely break down cultural barriers? I think there are two factors that I want to highlight, which is social factors and economic factors. Because one is that now that there's economic boom in Asia, and so all of a sudden developing countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Myanmar, they suddenly get a lot of opportunities to work. But the downside of that is that when women, like Salim say, is the investment in women having access to quality education, because a lot of women who live in the cities and the women who live outside of that, they don't have equal access to the kind of quality of education, the kind of work opportunities, and the kind of support. So then what is happening right now in Asia in the last few years that I got to know is that there's the potential of labor exploitation in Asia Pacific from countries like Myanmar, Philippines, Indonesia, because of the wage, like women are forced in a way they resort to going out of the country for jobs, to be domestic helpers, for instance, or they go to do low-end jobs. But there are agents that are not ethical, that they get tricked into forced labor or deceitful labor, and they don't have a way to get out of that. And that number is increasing from globally, we're looking at numbers at 32% in 2011. In 2014, it went to 40%. And in Asia Pacific, when we talk about trafficking, you know, initially I thought, okay, trafficking is related to sex trade, but it's not. It's about labor trafficking as well. It's at 62% in Asia, that such a large group of women, there are men as well who are exploited for labor. So I think that's something that we should be very concerned about as we progress in economically and not just looking at cultural barriers. Yeah.
We should follow up on another question. Is it a question of cultural barriers or of generations? Because, of course, we're talking a lot about millennials when it comes to the new word. So will millennial actually totally erase the cultural barriers when they think globally immediately, and when they think that equality is, of course, a value that they want to defend in this brand new world? It's an open question to the panel, so whoever wants to jump in the conversation can. Gabriela, maybe first.
On the cultural barriers.
And on the fact that now millennials and the new generation maybe see this question from a totally different perspective, like there is no barriers anymore, like they think globally immediately.
Well, I don't want to disappoint you. I think that there is progress. I think that the new generation might be more used to think that girls have the same right to ambition a nice career or a nice opportunity in life. Families are also more aware of that. But we still see a lot of very, very important obstacles for kids and for girls. And let me just bring the evidence again, because we are an evidence-based organization. The PISA report that evaluates the assessment of kids at 15 years old when they finish their compulsory education. We measure how girls and boys do in terms of maths, science, and literature. Of course, girls do better in literature. But the same group of girls that perform very high with the same group of boys that perform very high, when you ask girls, are you good in maths? 30% of them say, yes, I'm good. 60% of boys say, yes, I'm good. And why is this difference? Because of expectations. Because their families are not expecting that they are good in maths, because the teachers are not aware of their own biases in terms of what do they teach and girls are good for what, and because the girls themselves, and I have to say that that's a very, very important element, the girls themselves do not see as someone that can deliver and that have the right to be ambitious. So I believe that it's much more complicated because of course we have all the rules of the games that we need to change in the labor market and the economy that is so unfair to women or that prevents women to participate. But starting for that, what do you expect? You ask the families, what do you expect for your girl? And nobody will tell you that they expect them to be an engineer. And if they reach to be an engineer, they will get to a male world of engineers, where probably they would not feel so comfortable. But I think it's very, very problematic because there are lots of things that we need to change, as you were saying, in terms of these biases that we have and that nobody addresses. In the OECD, there are only, I think, 8 countries that have some targeted test for unbiased curricula. My daughter decided to study neuroscience, and her school orientator told her, oh, but you're so great in English. Why don't you go to Cambridge to do English? And I was like, well, thank you, but you don't understand anything. Because the reality, instead of encouraging them to go for the STEM disciplines, we're still thinking the girls should be doing something else, no? If they study.
Baroness Kingsmill, and we'll go back to Louis Schwetzer afterwards.
I think the millennial generation will bring about change, but I do think you have to remember that everybody at a certain age thinks the world is their oyster, and that it's only a little bit later on that the reality hits. And one of the biggest realities that faces women is their family responsibilities, and as I said in my opening remarks, that they're not properly shared, and that culturally we don't actually have institutions that enable us to. And I take, for example, Germany, who we always put forward as being a country that is European, in Europe that's very successful economically. It's very difficult. I sit on a board in Germany. It's very difficult for women in Germany to have careers. Schools start very early. Children usually come home for lunch. There is a cultural disadvantage to women with children who work. There are things like that which mean that are barriers that just make it difficult for them to, not to enter the market, because in Europe we've largely established equality of educational opportunities, I think. But it's to progress, to remain within, to reach any position of influence or power. I hesitate to use the word power because it's not what I really mean, but leadership roles, for example. Careers come to a pretty abrupt halt for women in Europe, around about 40. They come to an abrupt halt either from a point of view of progress up the greasy pole, if you like, or financially in terms of pay. So I think we do have to think about those sort of cultural differences within a European context.
Louis Schwetzer, on this question of millennials, and again, is it still a cliche to say that women don't dare?
Well, I think there's been progress in some fields, but still a lot to do. I mean, France is doing better than Germany in this field. That's true. We have, I think, achieved equal pay for men and women in the same job. That is established. We have not yet established equal pay for equivalent jobs, mostly held by men or mostly held by women. Policemen are better paid than nurses, for example, and that is true in every country and also in France. So that's a second issue. The third issue, as you rightly stated, careers are not the same for men and women. That is, the difference in pay between men and women in France is essentially based on differences in careers. And why so? We tried to study that and to understand that in a company which I headed for some years. And we found the first explanation was education. I mean, women are very well educated, but they tend to choose schools or universities from which you get out with a lower salary than the best French, let's say, management and engineering school. So the first difference, women do not come out of the same school as men. Then two women, a woman and a man coming out from the same school, have the same career, the same pay, until the child arrives. When the child arrives, the woman sees her career slow, and surprisingly, the man sees his career accelerate vis-à-vis the man and the woman who do not have children. And we found this quite interesting. And of course, it's linked to what Baroness Kingsmill stated, that when there's a child at home, it's supposed to be the woman's job to take care of it. And when a child is at home, the women at Renault stated, well, the man flees from home as soon as the small children are there, so he invests himself more fully in his job so as to escape from the family. And I'm afraid the women in Renault said this was true, and the men did not deny it. And it's even more important because it's around the age of 35, the late 30s, that in most companies, a decision on the future career, high potentials, is made. And this is exactly at the time women have children. So,
incidentally, do men have children at the same sort of age?
yeah, but
If
interestingly,
having children is the problem, then it's a problem that should affect both men and women. The fact is that our cultural differences, our cultural expectations of women are such that we do not enable women to share. We don't enable men to share or have cultural expectations of men to share domestic responsibilities, and we don't have the cultural expectations of women to share in work and to progress and to have the same sort of careers as men. So I think to sort of say, oh, that's the reason that women don't go forward.
I did not say that was a reason. I say that's what happened. And the truth of it, let's take a simple example in real life. A child's sick, and he has a mother who is working and a father who is working. If the father says, sorry, I will stay home because my child is sick, he will not be well understood by his colleagues. For cultural reasons, I agree, but he will not be well understood. If a woman stays at home because her child is sick, everybody will give full understanding and takes a consequence that therefore the company or cannot rely on her because she has to take care of her children. So I say, yes, there is prejudice. Yes, there are cultural obstacles. And it is shared, I would say, by men and unfortunately also women.
So on the question actually of shared duties, let me update you with a very interesting fact and figure. It's the Gates Foundation. Actually, they issued a new internal policy. Employees can now benefit from 52 weeks of paid maternity leave and parental leave for both its female and male employees. For instance, Netflix offers a full year and Facebook 4 months. It's still a question of shared duties. I understand that, yes, it is, when, I mean, the debate is going so much on this question.
Interestingly, in many countries, and among these France, there is parental leave for parents, but one sees that these parental leaves are taken mostly by women. And the Swedes there have taken measure, which I think should be implemented by every country, is that parental leave should be shared between the parents. It should not be the leave of the woman to take care of her child, but it should be as many weeks for the man as for the woman. And you should not have an imbalance there.
Really
Brief update with Gabriela, and then we'll move on to another question.
I think that we're touching upon a very, very important element in the rules that we have to equalize the conditions of women and men, taking into account our differences. Dual mandatory parental leave, but to make it mandatory for men and women to take it, because then companies cannot discriminate. And I'm telling you, 20 years ago, when Canada installed this question of dual parental leave, parents were like badly perceived if they took their parental leave. Nowadays, if they don't take it, they are really seen like, are you unhuman? Or what is this? So it's again, the combination of changing the rules, but also the mindset.
Michel Landel, would you issue a 52 weeks paid parental leave policy at Sodexo?
No, but I think the world is changing, right? And in my company, for example, we absolutely recognize men, taking care of the children, for this, when a baby comes to a new life. So it is really our responsibility as companies to create companies which are really inclusive. And so this is the way we organize the company, the way we organize flexibility, we organize the way people are hired, the philosophy of the company. So it's very, very much changing. And with generation, the new generation today, it's really changing. I have children, my kids, they want to take care of their children. And they are between 30 and 40, and that's what they want. And my boys, they're very, very pleased to do that. And they share, the work at home and everything, and that's becoming more and more common. Now, we are lucky because we have other population who cannot do that yet, right? But I think things will change, and in companies like us, when we are we employ 40,000 people in India, and many women, so we really have, we can impact, these populations. So we really have a very important social role to play as employers.
And actually, I know that this question of inclusion, equality, diversity is a real personal question to you. You do support these questions because you used to work, of course, in the USA, where you used to run Sodexo there, and then you bring back to France when you came back here to run the whole group, those questions and tackle them. And you just issued a very interesting study, too, that showed that the more diverse your teams are, the more effective they are.
Well, I think that, gender equality is the right thing to do, and as an employer, I have a role to play, to build a better society and a more equal society. That's absolutely true. But I also have an opportunity to change things, within my company. And it is absolutely clear that it's a business case for an organization like Sodexo, because it's the way to attract women. And as we know, 60% of college graduates are women. 70% of purchasing orders every day are done by women, right? So we employ, 420,000 people in the world. We serve 75 million people every day. So we have a direct impact, okay? And we've made this study to prove this business case among 50,000 employees within Sodexo. And we have, the outcome is that when we have a population of between 40 and 60% of women, we have much better results in terms of people engagement, employee engagement, better results in client loyalty and customer loyalty, and also in financial results. So you can prove that. And when we prove this, you can demonstrate that to your team, and that, after a while, people change, and it's part of the education of changing my organization.
Well, actually, attracting women to business is one thing. Attracting women to politics and administration is another. We'll go back to that question of boards and quotas and everything, but I would like first to hear about you, Nathalie. You're the second woman to run l'ENA, l'École nationale d'administration, and amazing facts and figure here. For the second time, I think, under your presidency, you tend to have an equal promotion, 45% of women.
45% of our students are now women. What is amazing is that you consider it amazing.
Yeah.
That should only be natural.
Still, absolutely.
Because our school was created 70 years ago, and now we've reached this number of 45% of women students. It's a necessity. First, because we have to attract the best talents, so there is no reason to focus only on one gender and forgetting the other. The second reason is that civil servants as well as political leaders need to represent citizens they work for. They prepare and take decisions which impact all the citizens, male and female. So they have to be representative of their society. It's a question of legitimacy. And the third reason is that the more diverse your manpower is, the more creative it tends to be. In a time of complexity, we do need diversity. So we worked hard to try to understand what was happening with the way we were recruiting our students. We were not willing to do positive discrimination, but we realized that for some decades we had done unconscious positive discrimination in favor of men. So we tried to attract more candidates, and then we figured out how to focus on competences that we were looking for, skills, motivation, potential, and not external appearance of our candidates. And working on these prejudices that you have when you recruit, making sure that you treat male and female candidates the same way, we ended up having almost a balanced class of students. And right now, at the moment where we are talking, today is the day where we give the result for the exit competitive exam of ENA, because we're a school where you have a competitive exam to enter the school and another one to finish your school, to complete your curriculum. And today is the day, at this very time, we are giving the results. And for the second year, the first of our students is a woman. She's a married woman with children, meaning that contrary to what is very often said to little girls, competition is not limited only for boys. It's the moment they dare enter into competition, they're excellent at it.
Baroness, you're a former member of parliament. Do you think it's a question of real political will? And Natalie, you can, anyone can jump in anytime, of course, but then follow up with Natalie on the question of political will.
Well, I'm not a former member of parliament. I'm a current member of the second chamber of the House of Lords.
My mistake.
No, not at all. And I'm certainly not a politician. I fiddle around on the edges of politics, if you see what I mean. But yes, I think political will is very important. I mean, I have written a number of reports on women's pay and employment for different governments. And, you know, there's a slight sense of déjà vu that I'm having with this conversation right at the moment because, you know, we do seem to have been discussing this issue for an awfully long time. And I think we all know exactly what needs to be done. It's just that there hasn't always been the political will to make it happen. And so, yes, I think so. And I still stand up and I still give speeches and I still use as much energy as I can in all the boardrooms in which I sit to bring about change. And, you know, incrementally, I think things are changing. But it's not going to be fundamental until there is possibly a revolution like they had in China or something, because it is interesting that is what's brought about an enormous change. Personally, I would prefer the Scandinavian model, which happens over time, than the hardships that you had to go through to achieve the socialist model in Singapore, in China. But nevertheless, I do think that it does need a political commitment from the highest levels.
What about a brief word with Natalie, and then we'll go back to you, Louis. So actually, question of political will also here in France?
I think it's a question of political will first. Yeah. You can make a lot of progress. First, when you realize what the real situation is. So this is why we need facts and figures. Otherwise, you tend to consider that as far as you know, some women leaders, well, the situation is satisfactory and you don't have anything to do. So yes, you need political will, but you don't have to wait until this political will is in place. There are also many individual initiatives, toolboxes that you can use at every single level to improve the presence of women. You have to encourage them while they are still students to have more ambition, to know more about the careers that they can embrace and how to reach them. You have to reorganize the way people work in each and every company, and Michel Landel was mentioning what he was doing at Sodexo. He didn't wait until a French chief of state told him to do so. He decided that for very good reasons, he would improve the situation of women in his company. And at every single level, you have to decide that you will give more room to a more balanced organization of work. And it's not only in favor of women or women with children, it's in favor of everyone.
We're tackling to the example of Sodexo, so first Michel Landel, and then we'll jump to Louis Schweitzer. Is the private sector way ahead than the administration?
I just want to say that, it takes the entire scope of stakeholders. It takes, the governments, NGOs, private companies. Everyone should be, focused on this issue. And at the end of the day, when you look at where it has progress when the law was in place. So, we like it or not, but, what gets measured gets done. And that's true in public and private life. So when you set objectives, you have a chance that they are attained. So in companies, this works only if you set objectives, you measure, and, you have consequences. So it should be the same for public life. And so I think we need to set quotas, right? Yeah. Even if the word quotas is not the right word, at the end of the day, it's the way to enforce things.
Yeah. On the question of quotas, I know you've been a fierce advocate, Louis Schweitzer, about this question, but do we still need quotas to make the case of equality?
I truly think we still need them for the time being. If I look at two examples, first, company boards. There was a lot of talk about it good to have balanced board, women in boards, and so forth. And it moved ahead by probably 1% a year on average. So it would take about 30 or 40 years to achieve a reasonable equality. In France, we decided to have a law forcing companies to have 20% female board members, or more exactly, of the less represented gender on board, and then 40%, and this should happen by 2017, which is quite close. And the experience has been extremely positive. It has improved boards. Why so? Boards were, I would say, an old boys club. You chose your friends, and you knew enough friends to make up a good board. And when they said you should have 40% women, well, you did not know enough women to put in your board. So therefore, you had to go to professional recruiters, headhunters, and establish a selection process. And therefore, one had new boards where A, you had professionally chosen members, and more independent because they were not members of the old boys club. And it appeared also, and this was an added positive, that these women who arrived did not feel they had the right to be here. They felt they had to show they deserved to be here. And therefore, they appeared to be more hardworking than the traditional board members who felt, they had a right to be there and therefore did not have to demonstrate that they were useful. And finally, I have always seen, I don't know if women are really different as leaders from men. It's a debatable issue. What I know is that men in the presence of women perform better than if they are all among themselves, because they want to show they're good. So for all these reasons, I think the quotas in France has been a huge success, a real success. We copied the Norwegians. I mean, we did not invent anything. We copied the Norwegians. And if I look at the civil service, one has also established a legislative quota of 40% of the higher position in the French civil service should over time be given to women. And this will force people to find the right candidates, to have procedures to choose candidates in which it's not the person who speaks the loudest who gets the job. It's not the person who pushes more who gets a job. It's the most qualified person who gets a job. And if one changes the process in this way, from the one who is, the most outspoken candidate to the one who is the best candidate, we will see more women and we will see better qualified civil servants.
Let's follow up on this question of quotas. Do we still need them? And is it a question of developed countries?
We are at 50% minus 10% or more. Women and men, I believe we need quotas. Once we're there, we won't need them anymore.
Go ahead.
There's just one small point I'd like to say. I do think that board representation is important, but it's a red herring. It's not that easy, it's not that difficult to achieve. What is much more important is to give women at the bottom the opportunity to come up, to be able to run companies, not sit on the boards of them. I mean, I do agree that life has changed, and I am a supporter of temporary quotas to come a long way. I have been sitting on boards now for 20-odd years, and it has changed. There are now more women on the boards, but it is definitely a red herring. What is much more important is the things that Michelle is doing to ensure that people come up through the through the passageway up through the organization. Educate them, recruit them, and promote them according to ability, and at the same time make it even Steven for domestic responsibilities.
Michelle, maybe a quick follow-up on actually what you're doing concretely from the top till the bottom at Sodexo when it comes to equality.
First of all, I completely agree. I think in order to populate a board, you need women who have experience, and you experience company life in executive committees. And frankly, this is the challenge in most of the companies. It is also the challenge in my company. Now I have a 45% representation of women in my COMEX, but the challenge is the ranks in the middle, and really to fill the pipeline and to make sure that this pipeline is not leaky. And for that, you have to create a more, a company which is more attractive for women, specifically when they are between 30 and 40 years old. And make sure that you institute the flexibility of the work, which is absolutely essential. Talking about parents' equality, men's and women. The way we recruit people. So it is really a constant work, a day-to-day work, a focus, a determination that all of us we need to have to change the way we work. And I believe that. Actually, digitalization should help. Yeah. And I think it would be an accelerator of change to help women and people to work from home. It's so I think it will be we will make progress. And I think things are changing in companies today, not fast enough, but I think we are on the right track.
Nathalie.
I fully agree that. Well, first, quotas are still necessary because if you look at figures, for the time being, leading companies are around, in France, around 12% of company CEOs who are women. It's the same in the civil service. So quotas are really necessary because didn't come naturally. How do you use the opportunities that digital revolution are providing? They are providing opportunities in terms of flexibility of work. And it's not only for women. As employers, we tend to view the society in a sort of an old-fashioned way. Nowadays, men are more often than not are divorced, and they need to dedicate some time to take care of their children. It's not that they don't want to, they have to. And a number of men are married to women with high level of qualification, high level of diplomas. And for instance, the idea that there should be mobility in private companies or in some administrations in order to be promoted is becoming a difficult idea, not only for women, but also for men. So we have to adapt what we offer to the employees, not only to attract and keep women, but also to attract and keep talented men. But in terms of digital revolution, I'm still somewhat puzzled to see that the new economy, startups and big digital companies here or in the United States are not really gender balanced. They are the ones who create the biggest number of jobs, and this is not where you find women going to this kind of jobs, and we really have to think about it. It's a question of education, it's a question of orientation. It starts at school.
And actually, it's a real question here. You're talking about the Silicon Valley role models. For instance, we have Sheryl Sandberg saying lean in and trying to bring way more women into the workplace when it comes to Facebook, but any single, high-tech giant. And still, Silicon Valley methods are despising women. We have to say that. We'll go back actually to this question of digitalization and role models in general, but I would like first to hear from Gabrielle, Janet, and Selim on this question of quotas. Is it a question for developed countries only? I mean, is it a question of, I would say in French, est-ce que c'est une question de riches?
I agree completely that we need quotas because progress has been very slow. But I also agree that if you just go for quotas, you don't get the results. But what happens in all of our countries is that it's the same women sitting around all the boards, which is fantastic. But that's not what we are aiming to. So we really need to build up these girls, and I look at Diana, for really pushing up more women having the opportunity to be represented in boards. But the question, the most important question is that, and this digital, I was invited to this fantastic session that Chancellor Merkel organized because she also had an outcome on gender issues for the G7, gender entrepreneurship. And she invited many women from many walks of life. But there was this lady who is the main editor of Germany. And she was bringing the issue of digital, not only because of the digital divide that might be another gender divide, but the question of that the digital world and the Silicon Valley is made up by men. Yeah. There are no women. All the software developments, all of the internet advances and progress, all the investments, there is only the lady that was running Intel, and she's gone. But the whole structure, so that's deeper than what we see in the onset. I think that the whole development of the upcoming digital revolution and the transformation of our economies doesn't have women's input. So it's pretty problematic.
But actually, what can be, let's say, hopeful for us is that we're on the verge of this digital revolution. We can now bring on values that will, shape this new world for the years to come. And the fact that, again, Sheryl Sandberg or Marisa Mayer are taking on such companies as Facebook or Yahoo is still proof that it's possible. But there's also another movement within the Silicon Valley and other places globally when it comes to digital. The fact that coding is empowering women. And it brings us to a new language that will, help us take on those kind of methods. I hope so. Following up on the question of quotas, actually, and is it a question only reserved for developed countries? Janet and Selim, and then we'll open up another discussion.
So I want to touch on 2 points. One is in the business arena and as well as in the politics. So the question about quotas, I think in business it's very clear. When you set a target, a plan can be set, you can monitor, you can track, and then there's accountability, and then you can improve on that. But how long does it take for a target to be set? How many board meetings have to happen before that can take place, right? That's what I think. And should we wait for targets to be set before something can happen? So in the business arena, I want to give the example of Fuji Xerox, a Japanese company. And everybody knows that the percentage of women in managerial roles and in board positions or in the senior management position is really low. We did a survey, and the HR did that in 2011. Do you know the percentage of women in managerial roles? It was at 3.3%. 3.3. And I was like, okay. And then I asked my Japanese boss. So among the highest ranked executives, senior executives, how many do we have in total? He said about 300. Out of 300, how many are women? 30, less than 30. Yeah, really low. But they recognize that. Even when I go to the Japan, the Tokyo, everybody knows that. But how does it really change? Even if they want to change, can the society just cross over the cultural barrier, the traditions, to make a change over time? The company set a target. By 2020, they want to achieve 14% of women in managerial roles and higher roles. And they did implement new structures. And also because in Fuji Xerox, we are traditionally known as a copier machine company, but with digital economy that is stepping up in entrepreneurship, in technology, innovation, the company is also making a shift in business transformation from a hardware company into a solution company, because that's the future business. That's where we can win in the marketplace. And the whole idea about innovating a new way of working came about. And then this gave the traction to a very traditional Japanese company to then be able to make the decision at the management level, to then start looking at researching what are the data, can we set a target, and things then put in place. There are HR initiatives where they get women to have sharing sessions and how they can help each other. But interestingly, right, when I was in Japan and when I interacted with my colleagues who are female managers, and they didn't find the value, they didn't actually want it. They feel that why the company is organizing that they just want to do their work. They feel they don't have some of them don't have the ambition to do that. That's on the other side as well, while there are women who want to be ambitious. So recently, in last month, there was a senior management movement in the sustainability department. So it was helmed by a male general manager. And the positive thing was that I thought that, okay, they're gonna pick another male Japanese senior management, but they selected a woman to head the sustainability team. And that, I think, personally, that was the first female GM, in a Japanese GM that I got to know. I think that is really progressive already. In the political arena, so I was saying that, do we have to wait for quotas and targets to be set for something to change? So in the political arena, we know, in the news, since Sunday in Myanmar, what happened? Yeah. There was a historical moment that Aung San Suu Kyi, a woman who leads a political party, and she won, and it was a landslide victory. Yeah. And then in Singapore, in the last election in 2011, we had the first women at 26 years old, not backed by any political party. She just came in fresh from school. And the people loved her. And they even though the party that she ran for didn't get elected into the government, But she won the elections online on social media, and people are still talking about her and like writing. And in the recent election that just happened in September, people were writing and saying that we want you to come back into politics. We want you to lead our country as the millennium generation. So, and then in Indonesia, we had the first female president, Megawati, that was elected in 2012. In Thailand, we had the prime minister who is a female. So I think that people, when the change can happen when people want it in the political arena. And we don't have to wait for policies to take place, to take the lead. I think that's good, but people and the power that each individual person have, I think we underestimate the collective impact that we can push for the change to happen. Yeah.
Selim.
3 points. One is when you start from an unequal base, you need unequal measures to get to equality. So therefore, when we talk about the quotas, these are basically affirmative actions that we are talking about. And the question is quota at what level? And your question was related to developing countries, so I'm just focusing on that.
And that's the question.
Exactly, that was the question.
You know, still stands for developed countries.
Precisely.
And what about the others?
Yeah. I don't think in developing countries at the lower level, I think women have made lots of strides. At one point in time, we also wanted to have quota at all levels of public service. I think that debate is over. At the senior managers level, in businesses and others, in developing countries, we do need quotas. Globally, in businesses, 22% of managers, senior managers, are women. And globally, 34% of businesses do not have any women at the senior management level. So therefore, we need that kind of quotas and the kind of the mobility climbing up the ladder there. I think that's the first point I would like to make, because we have not broken the glass ceiling, but at least we can make some cracks. The second point is with the digital revolution that you have talked about. We talked about Silicon Valley, but I also want to put in Bangalore. Sure. In Bangalore, I think it's different from Silicon Valley in the sense there are number of women, a large percentage of women at different levels of the digital revolution that is taking place in Bangalore. And I think in the developing world where the digital revolution is taking place, women's representation is important. And the digital revolution is absolutely important in one part of the developing region, and that is the Middle East, for women. Precisely because of cultural reasons, religious reasons, lots of women, educated women, capable women, cannot come out of houses and do work. And when you have the kind of connectivity with different kind of things, entrepreneurship is coming up. Women startup businesses are coming up. And I think those are some of the things where in different parts of the developing countries, the whole question of the digitalization of the economy are giving a lot of empowerment, a lot of economic opportunities for women. I think we should not forget it. My last point is that, yes, we can talk about leadership. I come from a country which is Bangladesh. We have the Prime Minister who is a woman. The leader of the opposition is a woman. The Speaker of the Parliament is also a woman. So, yes, we can talk about that. But I think it's also a question of expectation and perception. Sometimes we expect if the child is sick, it is the mother who take care of it. It is the mother who take leave from the office. And I don't think this is correct that if fathers take leave, they will have problems. If mothers take leave, then they will say, see, she should not have been hired in the first place. And then the perception particularly with regard to STEM, as we call it, science, technology, math, and engineer. Not so long ago, one very famous Harvard president said that women have less capabilities in science and technology.
And he was sacked.
Who was that? Lawrence Summers. He was sacked. He was sacked, and he should have been sacked. That's not the point. The point is, from an Ivy League president, and whom we think is a very enlightened person, if that comes from a person like Lawrence Summers, this is not only sad, this is absolutely unacceptable. And therefore, I think policies matter, leadership matter, political will matter, but at the same time, the society and particularly man will have to change their expectations and also their perceptions.
And actually, following up on this very good last point, who's your role model around this table? Do you have a role model? Is it a female? Is that a male? And in which sense does it empower you to go even more further? Do you personally have a role model? For instance,
I think Hillary Clinton is a terrific role model. She's hung in there. She's done a great job. She's a professional. She's written on all sorts of pretty horrendous domestic upsets, and she's hung in there. And this is what I feel about. I think you bring about change in a combination of sanctions and incentives, and you've got to manage those sanctions and manage those incentives. Some years ago, and I tell you, it was some years ago, I write a column for a business magazine, and one of the columns, in a fit of fury at one point, I wrote a column saying that men whose wives don't work should pay more tax because they are supported up to the hilt by unpaid labor, and that makes them able to function in the world in the way that I did not function in the world, and therefore there was unfair competition. That would have been a sanction. That would have been, but that was hypothetical, and as I say, came out of anger. But I would say that resilience and persistence and recognizing that life is long, that we work for a long time, and that you've got to hang in there. And that's where I would say Hillary has done so. And I hope very much that she achieves the final goal.
We'll see that on November 4 next year.
The following year.
Yeah, absolutely. Michel Landel, who's your role model? Do you have a woman as a role model?
Well, my wife, actually.
That's a very good answer.
But this is true. Actually,
yeah, absolutely. It's a diplomatic answer.
No. It's a true answer. It's a true answer. And I have to say, that she really helped me get it, right? But, I think in this thing, which is a very complex, situation for society and companies, it takes conviction. So you need to be convinced. And because it is still a man's world, we have to convince more men because they are in a position of making decisions. They are in a position of power. And if we have more men convinced, and I think we can do that, and I have the experience in my company, I have been able to convince more men and engage them, things will change. But it really takes that.
Does it take more time to convince men that women are absolutely inevitable in your promotion at ENA than convincing women that they have to do it?
I think that we have to convince men that they have interest in changing the rules, that changing the rules doesn't mean that women will come and take their place, men's place, but that they will take the place they deserve. And then improving selection, promotions is breaking the glass ceiling that the women were facing, but maybe building another useful glass ceiling, preventing incompetent people to be promoted. So it's the interest of many people. So no, it's not that difficult, but it doesn't have to be seen as a fight between men and women, and not women taking men's place. Otherwise, you find resistance, and there is still resistance. Myself, I had male role models because my first career was diplomacy, and it was a man's world. So I was inspired by older diplomats, and they were men. And why not? I think that what women need when they join careers where they join jobs or positions which were held mostly by men, they need mentors, they need tutors, they need to learn the implicit working habits, the codes. And why not having more men taking responsibilities in sponsoring, in mentoring women? I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, let's wrap up this panel with a final question, and we'll maybe start with you, Louis Schwedzer. If there was a single bullet to change women's perspective for equality, where would you put the emphasis?
Home. Home. Absolutely home. That is the point where all the inequality is created. And that is what we should change. The sharing of burden at home.
Gabriela.
I would support that, but I will expand a little bit. I think that we have all been talking about how to change rules, how to change structures, but Salim said it. It's just in the mindset, is the stereotypes, is how we are wired to think and expect who does what, and what women should do and what men should do. And I have to say that this is pretty much related to the political courage you mentioned. I was very encouraged to hear that President Hollande was establishing a rule to train early childhood educators to get conscious about the gender bias, because we are not conscious. And I thought that was fantastic, to get rid of the beautiful, sweet little girl and the very strong, intelligent little boy. I thought that was just very right on target. And you know what happened? He had to step back, because all the very conservative groups thought that we were taking away their sex affiliation. So it's like fighting gender biases and making us aware of those gender biases is very important. And I think starts with the family, but it has to go through the whole society expectations of what women and men can do. And probably we will build a more fair and more lively world.
Janet.
I think that it's the language that we use in discussions about how to bring about men and women on par. I have the question about a lot of discussions that I hear, and even in the policies, it will talk about, okay, the incentives to introduce to working mothers. How can we support working mothers? Then I ask the question, why do we not use working fathers as much as working mothers? Then why don't we use the word working adults? Then it puts the discussion in a very more objective platform. And the next language that I hear a lot is about, okay, so we need to change the workplace, the environment, and how do we do that? We need work-life balance, right? To support people who have families to raise children. But why do we use the word work-life balance? Do you mean that our time at work now can be confined within 9 to 5, and everything outside, you don't have to work? But our world has changed. It's like we're connected like 24/7, and you work for a global business, it's happening 24/7 as well. So why don't we use the word work-life integration? What can we do to improve work-life integration to support people who wants to have a job, whether he's a male or a female, whether he's single or married and go through the childbearing, raising kids, or single people, working adults who have to take care of elderly parents. So can we change the language that we used in discussions? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also the next point I want to emphasize is for women who are in the lower end in the economy, because I think there's still a lot of thinking from the traditions and the customs that get passed down from families, that many women still have the mentality that a man is their financial plant. And I want to tell this woman, I think we need to raise the awareness to help women who come from developing countries to know that they have an opportunity and they can hope to do something different, that a man is not their financial plant. Yeah.
Nathalie.
I think it all starts with education at school. School is really the battlefield, because all these bias, cultural differences, we may find them in families, and it's quite difficult to change mindsets. but at least we should make sure that you don't find them at school, that girls and boys are given the same opportunities, are explained the way to have ambition and go through the school system and reach out to the careers that they are interested in. We really have to work with teachers for very young kids to make sure that we don't raise our kids differently, whether they are boys and girls. And I'm not sure that even in developed countries, we have reached the target.
Michel?
Well, I think it involves all of us in society, right? I think we all have a role to play. And what I would say is that as individuals, we should not and we must not accept some of the things we see in the world, some of the behaviors. And we see that all the time in politics, in the medias, in everything. And we should never do that. Because unless we are very, very determined, things will not change or change much, take more time. So we should be very, very engaged.
Stand up for equality. What about you, Denise?
Well, if I could wave a wand and make life better for women now, right now, I mean, I think there are two things one has to do. One is to take some active steps against violence against women, because women are still more likely, to suffer violence in our world than anywhere else. And equality is no good if you're a victim of violence of one kind or another. So I think, and that's something which we haven't really addressed because we've been thinking about corporate life and political life and so on. And I think from that point of view, I still come back. I'm very interested in the way in which the LGBT movement has become so successful in a very short period of time in achieving its goals. And they have had very clear goals that have, and it's very interesting, for example, that the Irish government has legalized gay marriage but continues to consider abortion illegal. So men's rights to marry have been acknowledged. Women's rights to control their own fertility have not been acknowledged. And I would like to try and figure out the way in which we could focus our goals in this way to ensure that we do actually make progress. And I think probably I would say equal pay was the goal that I would stick with. Chase the money.
That's very true. Last but not least, Selim.
This is not the last word. I think if I have to choose, in my mind, the greatest challenge in development is to change the mindset. So I would focus on the mindset and the narrative. Life is larger than living. If that is true, then we should not talk about work-life balance. It should be life-work balance. Yes. So mindset and the narrative, that's where I would focus on.
Thank you all very much for your contribution.